Hi friends, sorry I'm a bit late. I hope you're all well. So, we're having Q&A. It's very cold in Tassie, so I enjoy the crisp winters and the sunny days. So, perhaps let's just start with some meditation. Just become aware of your breath. Let go of the worries of the week. Is your breath deep or shallow, fast or slow? Okay. So as usual, my internet connection is failing me. But anyway, I'll do my best. So I have your questions here. And if you have more questions, you can put them in the comments. Please don't troll me. I have been trolled quite a bit this week. Not exactly trolled, but people weren't very nice, some people. So I had to change the comments to friends of friends. Okay. All right. So this question I find is a particularly good one and very relevant to what I was posting this week about abuse in families and spiritual communities. So, when should we practice patience for reconciliation with someone who causes harm to us? Or versus when is it time to release and move on in a marriage or a friendship for lay people? I think it's really important to not practice idiot compassion. Compassion should never be a reason we stay in a relationship where we're not safe, where we're not respected, where there is coercive control, emotional abuse, or physical abuse. As soon as there is coercive control or physical abuse or emotional abuse, leave. And if you can't leave immediately, leave when it's at the best time, at the quickest time you can leave. Because you can't, you deserve safety, you deserve respect. That's just a basic prerequisite for living a good human life. But on the other hand, I think in the West we are very, so here I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm just talking about normal relationships that have their ups and downs, where people sometimes don't get on. And I feel like in the West, we are very impatient with our relationships and we don't know how to repair rupture. And we expect our romantic partner to be our best friend and, solve all our problems and be everything to us. And it's too much. It's too much pressure on one relationship. So I feel like everybody needs to learn deep listening. There's a really good book called Anger Cooling the Flames by Thich Nhat Hanh, all about relationships and healing conflict and deeply listening to each other. this is a really good book to have. And there is this practice called beginning anew, which is when two people in a committed relationship who've agreed to try to resolve their problems have a meeting, and one person who's having the issue, if they have looked deeply and they can't resolve it on their own, will send the other person a love message, meaning a kind message, without and they'll ask to make a time that suits both the people, not when the person is tired, not when they've said no, and it may be later on in the week. And then the person who is having the issue will speak in a way that is not blaming, not aggressive, but calm, and reflects how they feel. Like, when you do this, this is how I feel. Can we work with this? Can we work together to heal this? And the other person will not interrupt and listen deeply and reflect on their own, try to put aside their own quick reactivity, and really hear and feel and empathize with what the other person is saying. And if you're too triggered to, like, if you're too upset to respond, you might make another meeting the next day. But you need to take some time to reflect, and see, is the other person just caught in their own projection, or is this something that I also have done and need to apologize for or remedy? And, if both people are committed to deep listening and beginning anew, this can be a really powerful practice. But if someone is harming you sexually, financially, emotionally, and it's very grave, I think, maybe, obviously I'm not talking about serious abuse. I'm just talking about, they're upsetting you, it's frustrating, it's harming you, but not on a really serious level. Maybe give them one or two chances. Only you can really know this, because it's very contextual. But for example, your partner's cheated on you, or they've gambled away the mortgage down payment, or they keep taking drugs and won't get sober. These are all legitimate reasons to leave your partner, I think. And sometimes people just grow apart. But as much as possible, being people who practice the Dharma, we try to leave our relationship in a way that we remain friends and we don't harm the other person. How do we leave a relationship and not harm the other person? That's hard to do because feelings are going to be hurt. But we don't leave the relationship by cheating on our partner, by being cruel. I don't love you anymore. You're ugly, you're fat, verbally abusing them. We don't just go out for a packet of cigarettes and never come back. That's a metaphor. I'm not encouraging people to smoke, obviously. But, doing it in a mature way, that you've tried to work on the relationship and maybe you've gone to therapy and it's not working, and you've tried and maybe the feelings changed, and you just have to be honest about that in as kind a way as possible, because sometimes we have to understand that a relationship has to meet the needs of both people. And if it doesn't, people might leave. Sometimes people are not growing anymore. It's very hard, but I really feel like with beginning anew and with, knowing how to water seeds of happiness in each other, your relationship has a much greater chance of lasting. But yes, someone who is causing harm, like really serious harm, and is not listening to you, is not changing, I think that's a legitimate reason to leave a relationship. And in a spiritual community, a teacher who is contravening the Vajrayana vows to respect women, if they're womanizing, especially, they're sleeping with multiple students and they're not, it's so difficult with this consort practice. Very few people are really ready to do that. And that's a whole different conversation. But really, a teacher, if they're having a relationship, that person, it should be public, and that person should no longer be their student, ideally. They shouldn't be emotionally manipulating people, financially manipulating people, coercing them. If they're a monk or a nun, they shouldn't be, in a Vinaya-based celibacy tradition, they shouldn't be having sex with anyone. Sometimes it happens that people fall in love, and that's, the person has to leave their monastic vows and they have to declare the relationship to the public and no longer be that person's teacher, ideally. But, Tibetans have a very different way of working through that. But a teacher who's sleeping with multiple students is abusing their power. It's not an equal relationship. You wouldn't sleep with your psychologist. So, and then, yeah, like in terms of, there's a lot of, unfortunately, senior students of Dharma who post quotes by abusive teachers, and they know that these lamas have been accused of abuse. Maybe they haven't read the finer details, but actually they just don't seem to care. And they don't understand that by posting these lamas, they're minimizing the impact that those lamas' abuse had on women and children and animals. So to me, anyone who's posting a known abusive teacher's quotes, and they know that this teacher is abusive, and there is credible evidence of their abuse, they're not a safe person. I wouldn't entrust my spiritual well-being to a teacher like that. So, sometimes a teacher might make a mistake. They might say something stupid. They might be a little bit uninformed. But if they're showing gross manipulation, gross, emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, racism, sexism, they're probably not worth pursuing, There are good teachers around, so, but you should examine them carefully before you take vows with them or take an initiation. They should have good ethical conduct and be ahead of you on the path. If they're a Mahayana teacher, they should have compassion and keep the Bodhisattva vows. And if they're a Vajrayana teacher, they need an authentic lineage and pure view, which is the Vajrayana vows are very difficult to keep. Yeah. Okay, so next question. If we look at the myriad of teachings on ultimate reality, so I've kind of summarized it because it was quite long, and the true nature of mind or consciousness, or the nature of mind, and the various means in Buddhism of experiencing it, like Madhyamika, Dzogchen, and so on, is there an underlying universal factor pointing to the same thing? I mean, ultimately, I think Buddhism is beyond Buddhism. I think all spiritual traditions, in their purest sense, maybe with the exception of culty traditions, are seeking truth, are seeking ultimate truth. And And if there is an ultimate truth, it's going to be beyond Buddhism. It's going to be universal. I think all the Buddhist traditions are speaking essentially, their fingers pointing at the moon. The moon is awakening. And at the end of the day, there is 84,000 different Dharma doors, different ways of teaching the Dharma to suit different beings, because beings are varied, not all the same. And also the Dharma evolved, mutated, maybe. Not mutated, maybe that's not a great word, but it changed, adapted to each culture it was in. So I think their fingers pointing at the moon. But the most important thing is to realize the nature of the mind, to realize the nature of consciousness, to become free from duality and conditioned existence, and to rest in basic goodness, to recognize the emptiness/clarity, luminous awareness of the mind. But that is not as simple as it would seem. That is why we follow the gradual path of purifying our mind, accumulating a great store of virtue, doing no non-virtuous thing. And perhaps if we're lucky, we might meet a teacher who, says, look, see, your thoughts are like the bird's flight across the sky. Your mind is without borders, without edge, deathless, timeless. It is the pure awareness has always been there from the very beginning, but because you are, fascinated and absorbed in appearances, you do not recognize its essential nature. Okay, so then this person further said, consciousness is not created by the brain, but by a receiver. They were speaking about this in relation to quantum mechanics, I think. So, yeah, I mean, whether it's mind-only school, Yogacara, or Madhyamika, or Dzogchen, or, it's all pointing to the same thing, I think. Certain schools, like Vajrayana, claim to be quicker than others. Dzogchen claims to be the direct path, advanced. I think people have to make their own decision about that and, try different things for themselves. But eventually you do have to commit to a path. I mean, in Buddhism, consciousness is moment-to-moment awareness. It's the moment when sense consciousness meets objects, and it is a dependent arising. Its continuity arises from a causal process, just as one candle lights another. You don't the consciousness of, you could think of it as like a something that is rolled up, and then it goes between this life and the next, and then it is born in a certain body, whether it's animal, human, deva, and that expands again. The consciousness or the mind stream projects into the next life because of unresolved karmic issues, karmic seeds. From a mind-only school point of view, it is the alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness that carries the seed of unresolved karma, which past actions, which is there as a potentiality. But it's not like a physical thing, it's an energetic thing. But the basis of human existence is the 5 skandhas, which are like layers of an onion. An onion appears solid, but then you just take off one layer and another layer and another layer, and then finally it's like Wow, open space, nothing too solid. This is a really big topic and a very deep question. I do believe all dharmas have one taste, and that is the taste of liberation. But maybe some paths are more skillful, more quick than others. But that also depends on your karma. Like if you have more of a karmic affinity with Theravada, then, you know, those teachings will become really vibrant for you and work really well for you. So you've got to find the Dharma teaching that you have more affinity with. I mean, I feel like Tibetan Buddhism has a lot of really diverse and profound teachings as well. But I think it's really up to the individual. It's just hard to like mix everything up. I think that's, to be non-sectarian is actually really hard because it's like taking different kinds of medication at once, you know. You do need a main practice, you know, whether it's a deity practice or breath meditation or kind of loving kindness, you know, a regular thing that is the main thing that you're doing. Yeah, the clear light nature of mind is empty of inherent existence. And consciousness is the knowing aspect of experience. Yeah. So I don't know. This question is not easy for me, but yeah, everybody has Buddha nature, and the Buddha nature of a Chinese practitioner versus a Tibetan versus a man versus a woman versus a non-binary person. No, they're all the same. We're all made of the same stuff. And we just have to purify, sweep away the dust to see this basic goodness. And it, you know, the stories of how people get enlightened, like the Buddha taught according to people's disposition. To an old lady, he said, as you throw the bucket in the well, pull up the bucket with the rope with full mindfulness, just being aware of your breath and the rope. And she got enlightened that way. And to an old illiterate monk, he said, as you sweep the temple floor, think, I'm cleaning my mind. I'm sweeping away the dust of my defilements until pure awareness is revealed. And he attained enlightenment that way. And to others, you know, scholarly people who'd studied the Vedas, he taught dependent origination and, you know, complex teachings. So it just depends on the individual. But the point is, look at your own mind, look at the nature of your own mind, look at moment-to-moment awareness, and don't grasp after your thoughts and feelings as permanent, and question the reality of what you think and who you are, and don't hold it too tightly. But look for the space between thoughts, the unborn awareness. Okay, so somebody also, hang on. Somebody also said, is Buddha nature a permanent phenomena and some precious connection we have with all beings? This is classic question from someone who has been trained in Hinduism. Buddha nature is not just another word for soul or universal consciousness. Buddha nature just means the luminous awareness. At its most basic form, at least in the way Tibetan Buddhism describes awareness, it is this openness, it's the union of clarity and emptiness. It is appearances, thoughts, feelings, perceptions appear, but they're like characters in a dream, or like shadow puppets. They have no inherent permanent existence. things are in a, relative existence happens and it matters. We can't pretend that it doesn't matter, but it is ultimately empty of a permanent, unchanging self. It is light's energy in a constant state of play and change. Waves constantly arising in a sea of revelation. Yeah, so of course we have a precious connection with all beings because everybody's been our mother. And everybody has Buddha nature. So we are in service to all beings. But we also need to emphasize our own liberation, because we don't just want to endlessly swim around in this ocean of samsara, drowning, suffering, getting nowhere. Only if you're awakened do you really have something of lasting value to give sentient beings. Of course, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do what you can for them in the meantime. But enlightenment has to be the main pursuit, I think, of a Buddhist practitioner. Yes. So also, if you want to understand how consciousness arises, I think studying the 12 links of interdependent origination, maybe I'll put them in the comments on this post later, how consciousness is developed and how, we grasp at perception, we grasp at sensory input, we create karma, and then we create birth, sickness, old age, death. And so the wheel of samsara endlessly turns. Yeah. Okay. So someone asked, do Tibetans have the rainy season retreat for monks and nuns, the Vassa? Yes, they do in some monasteries, not in all monasteries. Tibetans have a 3-year, 3-month, 3-day retreat, and some yogis will spend their whole life in retreat. But usually they study for 10 or 15 years, monastics, before they go into the monastery. Before they, go into the 3-year retreat. But they start when they're 8 years old. Or, 12 or something. So as a Westerner, that's a very different situation. I am not purely a Tibetan Buddhist monastic. I am mainly trained in Tibetan Buddhism, but I consider myself a fusion of Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada, and I am doing a Vassa. I'm meditating for 5 to 8 hours a day for 3 months. And someone said, do you have support for this Vassa? I'm in a remote place, so I don't go on arms round. I do occasionally go on arms round at the Launceston Farmers Market, but I'll get like a packet of chips or a packet of nuts or something, so it's not enough to sustain me. So if people want to support me during the Vassa, they can make a donation via the monastery website, which I'll also put on this post. And we also have 4 nuns in our monastery in India. They're young girls. So if you want to support them, I'll also put the link there for Bodhicitta Foundation India. Okay, so someone said, I've summarized these questions, yeah? So how can I prepare a way to happiness? I wish I was in Nepal. When I was in Nepal, I felt happy. But in the West, I feel alone. People here are stressed out and not happy. Yeah, that was my experience when I came back from studying Buddhism in Nepal and India for a year when I was 17. We have so much, we're so privileged, but we are constantly thinking about what we don't have. So, yeah, and it's only getting worse with the growth of how expensive things are, and rent, and the cost of living going so high. I actually feel really sorry for young people, and I hope they have a bit of a revolution, a non-violent revolution, if that's possible. Well, happiness is also a very subjective thing, because what makes one person happy may not make another person happy. But I do feel like a regular practice, you know, before you go to work, try to wake up and, you know, go and sit by your shrine and make some offerings and do some half an hour of practice. I feel like it really changes our day. Try to find a in-person sangha, face to face, that you can go and sit with, a teacher that you can ask questions to, spiritual friends, spiritual community, volunteer maybe at a local soup kitchen. Find a sense of meaning for your life, because if we have a sense of meaning, we can endure all kinds of challenges more easily, because we feel our life is worthwhile. Whereas if we're just in a job and we just go to work and we come home to a cat, we don't feel like we don't have a lot of, we need community and we need meaning, to feel like we're making a difference and that we're appreciated. So I feel like community, service, and a regular spiritual practice are all ways that you can increase your happiness. If you can find a job where you work remotely, maybe you could go and live in Nepal, a few months a year. Or perhaps you could start, studying Buddhism part-time at university. Or, in your holidays, go to a monastery, go to a retreat center. On your weekends, there are a lot of monasteries all around the world, retreat centers where you can go and practice, go on a short retreat, join a center. These are all ways that we can put the Dharma in our daily life and find more meaning. But I totally understand life in the West is stressful, and, getting out in nature can also be really good. Developing a garden, fostering a child. There is just, if you're suited to that, obviously. These are all ways that we can find meaning and develop more joy. But I feel like we really do need regular practice and community. So I hope that gets better in your life. Yeah. And I also feel alone sometimes. You are not alone in feeling alone. We are, in a capitalist society that doesn't have a lot of spiritual values. Loneliness is a kind of disease. Especially, it's gotten worse since we're all on our phones, where these kind of relationships we have online, I don't think are quite as nourishing as the relationships we have in person. Face-to-face connection really matters. Asking people for help, or just being... Sorry, my internet is coming and going. Like everything in life. Okay, so somebody else got asked. Okay, is an empty mind the goal of Buddhism? No, not just an empty blank mind. The goal of Buddhism is to attain awakening, and awakening is to realize the nature of interbeing, interconnectedness, to become free of birth and death, to realize the empty nature of the self, meaning that there is only a relative self that arises due to causes and conditions. There is not a permanent, unchanging self, but also to realize luminous awareness, to purify the causes of self-grasping, negative karma, greed, hatred, and delusion. This is the goal of Buddhism. And then if you're a Mahayanist, to become a Buddha, to liberate all beings. And we do that, through following the path of meditation, through following the Eightfold Path, right understanding, right thought, right action, right speech, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right effort, and so on. Right wisdom, right, all of that. Um, okay. This is an interesting question because this week I posted on Facebook just about my experience of the chat. Somebody wrote somewhere on one of my posts like, the world doesn't need monastics now. They're irrelevant, and you should just get a real job and stop being a bludger, more or less. And being a layperson is enough. And I just, people have been telling me that my whole ordained life, even when I was homeless, even people who've studied the Dharma a long time, and it really broke my heart. So I made a post about it, and I said, the Buddha said monastic life is valuable, and I'm not saying lay people can't get enlightened, or that being a layperson is an invalid path to liberation. Not at all. There are many lay people who've attained liberation. There are many impressive householder yogis. But the Buddha said, why did the Dharma, when Ananda asked him why the Dharma of previous Buddhas disappeared so quickly, he said it was because they didn't have a vinaya, a code of ethics. And he said when the monastic tradition fully disappears, there will be no more Dharma, because the Dharma is, the ethics are like the boat that preserves the Dharma. And the Dharma has not fully flourished in a country until the people of that land, not all of them, obviously, we don't need everyone to become a monk or a nun, just some good people. When the people of that land take the robe, that is when we can call a place a Dharma, a land where the Dharma is flourishing. And he said the prerequisite is fully ordained monks and nuns, not just monks. All the kind of lay Dharma teachers saying, oh, monks and nuns, oh, there's abuse, there's corruption. There's also abuse and corruption in lay society, in non-religious society. And the Dharma you have you have it because it was preserved by monasteries. That's not to say that monasteries are perfect. Especially, when you ordain people as children and they actually may have no vocation to be a monk or a nun. We don't need vast oceans of monks or nuns. What we do need is sincere people who want to devote themselves to the spiritual path. Okay, so someone said, is there a reason? So I got really trolled on this post. Really rude, mean comments, actually. It was quite disappointing. But not surprising, because people have said this. People even in my own Dharma center, where I dedicated 5 years of my life to being the spiritual program coordinator, when I ordained as a nun, they were like, get a real job. And I was like working, 20 hours a week running that Dharma center, as well as working 20 hours a week as a lay, wearing lay robes in lay clothes in a office. And I neither had the freedom of lay life nor the benefits of being a full-time nun and getting proper training. So I left that situation, and that's one of the reasons why I don't call myself full Tibetan Buddhist, because the way Tibetan Buddhists treat Western monastics in the West is a dumpster fire. It's a disaster. We have an 85% disrobing rate. And the Tibetan lamas, unfortunately, just tell people to support them because they're poor refugees. But honestly, not to say that all lamas are bad, many lamas are good, but these high lamas are not poor refugees, they're millionaires. So, we have established monasteries in exile, and it's time for us to also have viable, flourishing centers where the fourfold community who preserve the Dharma, fully ordained monks, nuns, householder yogis and yoginis, working together to preserve the Dharma in the West. Yeah, and that means not charging monastics. That means giving them time to study and practice, gain realization, to become inspiring Dharma teachers. Okay, so yeah, someone said, is there a reason to take monastic vows, or is being a layperson enough? As a Westerner, it seems very hard to ordain in the West. it's true, it's very hard to ordain in the West. There are 5 centers in the world in Tibetan Buddhism that fully support monks and nuns and don't charge them, Western monks and nuns. 2 of those centers are headed by people accused of rape. So, but there are, some encouraging things, like there is my place. There is Shravasti Abbey in America, run by Thubten Chodron. There's some other monasteries. Venerable Acacia online was telling me she has there's a Kagyu center somewhere in the States that doesn't charge Western monastics. There are a lot of Theravadan centers. I really like the way Theravadins treat monastics and the way they run their monasteries. I run my monastery more like a Theravadan center. And the forest monasteries, there is many, a few forest monasteries like Dharma and Empty Cloud and Abhayagiri for men and women that are popping up, and there's many others as well. And it's good to support them. To be honest, I don't feel super optimistic about Westerners ordaining in Tibetan centers, because the agenda is usually around a Tibetan patriarch whose agenda is to send money back to India. And all the leaders it's like very ethnocentric. All the leaders are men and mostly Tibetan. So if I was going to ordain, I would look for a place where there are female teachers, where you are not charged as a monastic, where you have time to study and practice, where the essential robes, food, medicine, shelter, and, emotional and spiritual support are offered. And that's mostly in Theravadan, maybe some place like Plum Village. But I understand wanting to study Tibetan Buddhism, there are places I've just mentioned. But, having some savings is good, is important. I believe it's a very personal question if you want to ordain or not. It's not for everyone. You can make a lot of progress and study with really impressive teachers as a layperson. But if you want to dedicate your life, it's a really powerful way to practice. They say being a monk or a nun is like being a snake in a bamboo pole. You can either go up or down, nothing in between. So I think it's when you take the vinaya, the vows, it's like turning up the heat on your practice. So if you do it well, you'll progress. And if you don't do it well, it could just become a hindrance. It can create a lot of anxiety if you don't have a lot of savings and you don't have a place to live. And, for me, that was a really difficult thing that made my Dharma practice maybe more challenging. But I still am glad I was a nun in my life. I am a nun. And I feel it's a really meaningful path. And I feel we need monastics. And I feel it's a really inspiring and meaningful way to practice. But I feel like we really need young monastics. Just people ordaining who have, only rich people who have savings, a bunch of retired people. I don't think, communities are viable if everybody's just living in their own lay house with their own retired money, not building a community. I think, being alone as a monastic is valid, but I don't think we're going to preserve the Dharma like that. I think we need communities, and we need to support young people to ordain, and be inclusive of trans people and non-binary people, and, ethnic diversity. All of those things matter. But as you can see from my post about monastic life, there's a lot of people who really think monks and nuns are not necessary and have some really unkind, ungenerous points of view, and haven't read the suttas about what the Buddha said about the value of monastic life. Okay, someone else asked, how can we support Tibetans? Because the Chinese are clamping down on Tibetan language in schools, and they're trying to destroy the culture. you can maybe support a child at the Tibetan Children's Village. Very few Tibetans are still escaping to India because the Chinese have really shut down the borders. Maybe you could support a charity like Medicine Sans Frontières that's operating, or a charity that's operating with nomads inside Tibet. Maybe you could support the Australia Tibet Council, or the Tibet Council in your country. There's lots of charities for Tibetans in India. Maybe you could just look on dalailama.com. You could teach English in monasteries in India, or maybe even in Tibet. You could hold a protest in front of the Chinese embassy. Other than that, I'm not 100% sure. It's lamentable what is happening, what has happened to Tibetans, what is happening in Tibet is really sad. It is millions of people died. It's a tragedy. Yeah, but I would just add that we shouldn't neglect spreading the Dharma in the West and building monasteries and centers that suit Western people in favor of, just because the Tibetans are refugees. The Tibetans have been refugees since 1969. 59. Okay, so is there a meditation to live more consciously and not repeat patterns? I think daily mindfulness of thoughts. There is 4 foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of body, like when I'm eating, I'm aware that I'm eating. I'm not doing something else. I'm doing one thing at a time. When I'm walking, I'm just walking. I'm aware of my feet touching the earth. When I speak, I'm just speaking. I'm not doing 100 other things. So slowing down and being aware, and then being aware of sensations, feelings, mind, and objects of mind. So when we're aware of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, we're aware of, oh wow, my anger has been triggered. And if we're aware my anger has been triggered, okay, I need to not speak right now because I'm upset. I need to go back to my breath and reflect, and so that I won't act in a way that I'll regret, and when you're more calm, okay, where did that come from? Why was I triggered? What is the trauma there? Or what thoughts, how am I speaking to myself? What am I grasping after? This mindfulness practice is really powerful. But mindfulness in daily life, mindfulness of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, can only be sustained when we build concentration in our meditation practice. So following the breath, or doing a visualization, for example, the Buddha of Compassion, and imagining saying the mantra of compassion, Om Mani Padme Hum, the Buddha of Compassion above our head. You can find a picture of him online, and you just imagine that, or he's in your heart, and then rainbow lights are coming out, purifying your body, speech, and mind, sending loving kindness to all beings, liberating them from suffering, giving them blessings. And then you imagine that the Buddha of Compassion at the end completely dissolves into a ball of light and comes inseparably into your body, speech, and mind. And his luminous awareness becomes one with your mind. Something like that. So the meditation in the morning or feeds into the mindfulness in daily life. And both of these things are needed so that you're not following your unconscious tendencies. But if you find that you're like really obsessing about something or some trauma from the past, going to therapy is also not a bad thing, or cognitive behavioral therapy, just something that brings to calm down the, the record we play, the story we tell ourselves. We're actually very unkind to ourselves sometimes. You're fat, you're not good enough, whatever we've internalized. And just start questioning the story you're telling yourself. Is this true? Is this reality? Or is this my distorted trauma? Yeah. Okay. who are Nakpas and Nakmas? Okay, Nakpas and Nakmas are a specialist, a ritual Vajrayana specialist in Tibetan Buddhism. They're not just the average Buddhist. They're a person who dedicates their whole life to the Dharma. They might have a job outside, or they might not. They might be a yogi. They might go around doing rituals for people in the context of Tibetan or Himalayan society. They might spend their life in retreat. One of my teachers is a Nakpa. He's a very impressive person. There have been Nakpas, yogis basically, or Vajrayana gurus, Vajrayana masters with great realization. But they're not an average person. They're a person who has studied the Dharma deeply. They often grew up in a monastery or are affiliated with a monastery. And monasteries will often have, sometimes in Tibet, yogis, Nakpas, married practitioners, married yogis. And they'll also have monastics. Vajrayana is quite egalitarian, it has roles for yogis as well as monastics. You'll also find in American Zen from the Japanese tradition, a lot of the people who are priests wearing monastic robes are married. They lost the Vinaya-based ordination of monastics from the Buddha because the emperor was threatened by the monks' power. So he forced the monks and nuns to get married. So now there are priests who live a kind of semi-monastic life in Japan. Which is quite varied. There are some Zen priests who live like monks most of the time, not even married. And there are some who live almost like a normal life and then, put on their robes and go and teach sometimes. Okay, so what is a wise place to rest the mind? I'm not sure what you mean by rest. Like an object of meditation? You could just follow your breath is a great thing, like as you're walking to work, when you're having a lunch break and you're sitting in the park, eating mindfully, following the breath. Before you need to say something difficult to your partner, take some breaths. The breath is a wonderful focus for present moment awareness. But there is all kinds of meditations. There is loving kindness. There is awareness of death. There is the different stages of the body decomposing to develop insight into impermanence. There is meditation on the precious human rebirth. There is meditation on deities in Vajrayana Buddhism. So there is a good book with different meditations in it called How to Meditate by Kathleen MacDonald, published by Wisdom Publications. It's a really good guide for meditation I still find it useful, but it's mostly for intermediate or beginners. Okay, so someone else asked, how best to apply practice in daily life to relieve the suffering of the world? How are we going for time? Yeah. That's a interesting, challenging question. I mean, I think I've said it again several times tonight. Developing your daily meditation practice, purifying your mind. Liberate yourself first, but do what you can for the world as well, in terms of you could sponsor a child in India or Africa. You could go to protect the forest from logging. You could join your local bush regeneration group. But purifying your own mind is a really important place to start. developing a spiritual practice, supporting the growth of mindfulness and kindness in the world, talking about maybe conflict resolution, maybe if you're a psychotherapist, in your own field, maybe there is ways to talk about compassion that aren't dharmic, that are just secular, and spreading it that way. But I think we've got to start with our own mind. Maybe also like joining a kind of peace movement, lobbying our leaders, supporting, local food co-ops and community gardens, and sharing resources with each other, building local infrastructure so that if, say, because of climate change, because of political instability, everything falls apart, which if you told me 20 years ago, I would have thought you're crazy, but now I'm like, that's a real possibility. I think building your own garden, your own food garden, feeding people, community gardens, building networks of care, local networks of care is actually really important. Also, a lot of older people are lonely in their own home. Nobody visits them. So, befriending your elderly neighbor, Meals on Wheels. There's just so many ways we can, community dinners. There's just so many ways we can help each other locally, and, becoming part of your local monastery. A lot of monasteries in the West don't have a lot of community, especially if they're Western. And that's also a great way to make friends. Also maybe looking into what's going on in Gaza, if there is a way that you could support someone there. Advocating for justice, climate change. There is just so many causes, and you have to choose something that's relevant to you. But the world is not doing well, so we have to turn up however we can. Okay, so does anyone have any, and elevating the voices and work, the charitable work, the spiritual work of people who are doing good things is also a good, and also maybe offering therapy to people who can't afford it, because often the people who need therapy can't afford it. Poor people, incest survivors, people escaping domestic violence. If you've got a spare room in your house and someone needs a place to stay and they're a safe person, maybe think about offering them accommodation for a month, But you've got to do what you can do and not overextend yourself, but just extend your heart a little bit more. And it's like a muscle. Compassion is a muscle. The more you exercise it, the bigger and more resilient, and the bigger your capacity to help the world and hold space for the world increases. Yeah. So does anyone have any other questions before I finish? Someone said, I am deeply, I'm deeply grateful for your words. Thank you, Jen. I can't see any other questions. Nope. Okay, so may all beings be happy. May you be well. May people think of benefiting each other. May we quickly realize all things to be no more substantial than the dream fabric of the night, and instantly awaken to perceive the pure wisdom display in the arising of all phenomena. May the precious mind of compassion, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase more and more. So just if you want to join my online community, we have a WhatsApp group, and we have a more formal Dharma class that I will give next Saturday at 2 o'clock Australian Sydney time. So if you want to do that, just direct message me. I'll put my email in the down below. If you'd like to donate for this Dharma talk so that I can offer more Dharma talks, please feel free. The monastery link will be down below. I also have a YouTube channel with lots of free teachings called Bodhicitta Foundation. I'm doing a tour of India at the end of January, the 4 holy places of Buddhism. You can sponsor a child in the charity, the girls' home that I run in the center of India. If you're interested, it's $40 a month and tax deductible in Australia. We have this beautiful coffee table book of all the work we've been doing for so many years, which is 150 Australian dollars. If you're interested in that, to support the work that we do in the slums of central India, you can buy that. It's a nice thick book. It's 150 Australian dollars. You could order a bigger one if you're interested. We're having a retreat in October at my monastery in Tasmania, if you're interested. Otherwise, may you be well. Have a great week. Take care of yourself. Be kind. And look for unborn awareness. Keep your mind spacious. Good luck, everyone. All the best.